All right. So as an Australian conservative and a Christian, how would you describe your political views overall, given your life experiences?
So I call myself a capitalist. So that's right wing, libertarian. I have a few friends that are anarcho-capitalists. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel
So you,
about
so you,
that. Whenever I hear anarcho, I'm like, no,
so,
I'm not an anarchist.
hold on. You've got libertarian friends that are so libertarian that they're actual ANCAPs. That is
Oh
hilarious.
no, they just I mean, because if you, I to my understanding, an anarchist is different to a capitalist. A capitalist has a little bit more. They're just that little bit higher. If that makes sense. Whereas, but a libertarian seems to be rather broad in the people they have. Like they might have people that believe in small tax. There might be some believe in no tax. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. Have you seen the political spectrum graph before?
Yeah, the axis. Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah,
axis. It goes from the y-axis from top to bottom. The
yeah,
higher up you go is the more authoritarian you are. The further down
yeah.
you go is libertarian.
Libertarian.
Left is economic authoritarian, or communistic, and further right is complete free market. So anarcho-capitalists would be at the very bottom corner of quadrant 4. That's where anarcho-capitalists are. They're basically
Yeah,
Anarcho-capitalists are basically the most hardcore of libertarians. They believe that the
yeah.
government is completely illegitimate, and that the only way to ensure property rights, et cetera, is to live by the non-aggression principle in an anarchic society.
Yeah. So I have a
In my
couple.
in my in my in my opinion, right-wing libertarians are true libertarians. The lefty ones are just the guns, weed, and gay marriage
The
filthy degenerates.
left ones are just they're like you do.
Sorry, say that again.
um,
Your mic cut out.
oh, sorry. I was just saying that the left wing are just the hippie. They're just hippies. They can say, do whatever you want, man. But I'm not going to think about anything.
Yeah, that's basically what the lefty libertarians are. They're
Um,
the they're the hippie ones. They're not authoritarian per se, but they're not exactly very principled people either.
so given that position you were just talking about, in the bottom right corner of the quadrant, I would come up on the diagonal like a bit, because like I do believe in small government, but not as extreme as anarchy sort of thing.
Hmm.
And being a monarchist too, I'm gonna have there's like a joint. There's like some restraints there. But I'm not central. I am on the right. Um, I I support like a small tax, but there's so many different types of tax and so many levels, and it's not going to get into that because there's just too much to discuss there. But
Yeah,
you know,
especially you're not going to go exploding on the libertarian rant of how taxation is theft, and how
yeah,
and how the government shouldn't be involved in building
yeah.
roads and school. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think education should be federalized. But
No, yeah, I agree with you on that one. Then going into education, it's sort of I bugs me that I see so many in Australia politicians not talking about education. Like and if there is education, it's things like SJW stuff, and I'm like, I don't want any of that near my education. There's nothing really. They don't talk about the different effects that a more nationalized versus a localized one. Like you can have science, whatever, and to have everyone together on the same level as English, but you definitely need to. I mean, it's similar. It's similar just to the government in general. You need that. It's not just a localized thing. It's a smaller government, because like we have a small government here. I mean, we have a local government here, but they're not small. They're a big local government, and there's lots of corruption there. And it's the same thing for education. Like you could have someone be sent up from the capital to go teach at the school or whatever, but that doesn't mean it's actually beneficial. Get the most out of it for the students. I mean, the most beneficial way of doing it. So I do believe in small government, but I'm not completely opposed to some tax, if that makes sense. I definitely do not think the government is a charity case, though lots of people treat it as such, like they're entitled to everything. Again, I'm not in support of that. For example, but also I'm brought up in a time where I'm used to the government being there anyway for roads and hospitals and things like that. So, which are sustainable, but they just need better management. So maybe that just comes down to how the tax is used rather than how much is being given, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's basically fair to say that you're, I could best characterize you kind of like how I'd characterize myself, which is a conservative with some libertarian leanings. Like you're not
that's why
like you're not a big government. Yeah. You're not a big government conservative, right? Like you're not for like you're not for like a lot of foreign intervention. I mean, I know you're Australian, so you guys don't do a lot of foreign intervention. I don't imagine. But I don't know. I know I'm speaking from my American perspective here, but basically, is it safe to say that you're a smaller government conservative? You don't believe in the government having a hand in business or corporatism or foreign intervention? Is it basically?
Yeah.
Basically, I guess you could say conservatarian.
Conservatarian. Well, I mean, that's why I just went with capitalist, and then I went to go make that differentiation with an anarcho-capitalist, because it's capitalism is a broad thing, and then you've got, some are more extreme than others. And I'm a moderate capitalist.
We'll just say you're a conservative. Just a traditional small government. Western.
I'm a basic conservative.
Western Protestant work ethic, small government conservative.
Quite. You just mentioned the Protestant work ethic. And you mentioned this to me earlier, and I actually have a question about that. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Protestant work ethic.
Oh, okay. I'd have to go in a bit of historical context. So the Protestant Reformation, we all know it basically had three main breakaways. It had John Calvin, it had Martin Luther, it had King Henry VIII. Previously, the last big church split was the Great Schism. Now, the Great Schism was over, my centralized church government is better than your centralized church government. But what the Protestant Reformation did was, and this was fully realized by the American Revolution, it changed how Christians viewed the government. Because traditionally, what did Christians always teach? Oh, pray for your leaders because they are ordained by God. Don't try to overthrow your government. Well, the thing is, the Great Schism wasn't good enough, because clearly people were still finding heretical things being taught by the Catholic Church. Martin Luther, John Calvin, and King Henry VIII. Although King Henry VIII is just because he didn't want to have to execute his wives, but the Pope wouldn't let him divorce. So his reasons kind of sucked. But I use Martin Luther as a good example. The Catholic Church was so rigid, and he found so many problems with traditional Catholic teaching, but couldn't teach them, and got in trouble for them. So he completely left the church altogether with his new followers, the Lutherans. And they inherently distrusted centralized church bodies. Now, eventually this would materialize itself a couple hundred years later in the 1700s, as even the Church of England was becoming, still had leftover elements of the Catholic Church in it. That's what the Puritans tried to free themselves of, to purify themselves from the remnants of the Catholic Church, such as centralized church bureaucracy. So in America, the American Revolution solidified this notion of Protestant work ethic, that Protestant Christians inherently distrusted highly centralized, highly authoritarian governments because they would inherently corrupt God's word. They would use God's word to quash dissent and to religiously persecute people. I mean, if you look at all of the first, at least all of the first English colonists to America, they were all there to escape religious persecution.
Yeah.
So when I say Protestant work ethic, I mean you don't rely on. Protestants are uniquely individualistic. They're very individualistic because of their history. They distrust authoritarian governments, and because of that, and I'm noticing more atheists and agnostics acknowledge that if it wasn't for this concept of Protestant work ethic, the Anglo-Saxon tradition, if you will, which America basically perfected. It started with Great Britain and its colonies, and starting with America and then spreading to the rest of the Western world.
Mm.
Individualistic capitalism wouldn't exist. Basically, we would all still be living under monarchies as colonies. Mercantilism.
It's interesting you bring up the word individualistic because ultimately the church is not in support of individualism because we're a corporate group. We work together, we're a family, body of Christ, that sort of thing. And there are lots of the particulars within, and I mean, I'm talking about individualism as like it's ism. It's not. It's something that it's like a Gnostic thing. It's people battering with their own bat, and in a political sense, I get that. But for the Christian, it's actually something where you should be working together. And I think, that still works with capitalism though, because you trade with each other, and you purchase things off each other. You can even give charity to each other. I just don't like that. I just don't like that word individualistic. Independent to some degree, but not
independent
completely.
of centralized authority, like
Sure,
like the man of the house. The Christian family is its own individual unit at the end of the day. Yes, it is healthy for churches to meet together to help each other grow in the faith, but it's not totalitarian and authoritarian. That was something that that was something that the Protestant tradition changed, is that it limited the scope of ostracization. Yes, you can't have complete individualism or complete collectivism, but what it seems that the Protestant tradition did was remove the unhealthy extents of collectivism that the church had grown corrupted with.
Dictatorship.
The sort of dictatorship. If you really look at the teachings of Jesus, you'll have some people try to claim that Jesus was a socialist, and it's like and it's like no, he wasn't, not at all. He taught, give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. And if you think about it, Jesus was asked about government multiple times, and he never gave a straight answer. And even go further back in the Old Testament, you have when the Israelites were begging for a king, and God said, no, I'm not going to give you a king, because if I do, that king will usurp his authority ordained by me and then claim to speak for me. And they kept begging, and he's like, okay, fine, I'll give you guys a king, and I'll show you why I don't want a theocracy. Like, Christianity is very unique in that Christianity is explicitly anti-theocracy in a way. Like, in many ways, you could argue Jesus is almost a libertarian himself, because every Christian's walk with God is an individual walk. And the church and the family are there to support and help grow, neither complete individual nor complete collective.
He's not an anarchist, though.
No, clearly not. Because again, give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. That you don't have to be wholly controlled by the collective, but being a total individual isn't right either.
Sure.
You need bits of both.
Yeah, sure.
So that's what I meant by the whole Protestant work ethic thing.
Sure.
So that being said, I think you pretty much gave the pretty clear answer. What you feel the legitimate function of government is, right? And how deep a hand do you think it should have in the lives of private citizens?
Um. Oh, hang on, my thing's going missing. I found it. So good. The screen disappeared. How much should the government have involved with private
Involvement,
ends?
yeah, involvement in the private life of the individual, whether it's family, money, taxes, anything. Like, how far should the government intrude on the individual or the family's life?
Well, they shouldn't intrude. Um, that is not encourageable for anybody. Um, it's difficult because I'm used to a government that, whether it's left or right, it's still very similar structured here. They will provide to some extent, but personally, I'm not expecting them to provide or tell people they are entitled to have so much welfare or something like that. So, I mean, I'm very passionate welfare. So when it comes to the government providing for, people just to, and the problem is in Australia is that lots of people abuse the welfare. Like if you're disabled, like sure, if you are a pension, you really can't afford to look after yourself, sure. Even though there's still parts of me that disagree with that because I don't see the government as charity. That's why we have the church. The church should be there to look after people, but people aren't Christian anymore. People, it's a really awkward phase. So I'm trying to juggle between, okay, so the secular nation needs the government to look after them, but there's still so much that they shouldn't be doing. Like, sure, go make sure the roads are safe, do all that, but don't go spending all our money. Actually, a lot of it is money going to the wrong places. It's not so much their involvement. Like they do regulations and laws may limit small business people. We have a farm and we have regulations at the moment which were cut back a bit because we got a conservative government back in and then the left came back in, whatever. But the left government said, oh, you can't dig up these weeds on your land because they're native plants, and the environmentalists say you're not allowed to do that. And like, but we have cows and they graze and eat grass. If we don't get rid of the weeds, the grass isn't going to grow. So we got those sorts of complications, and that's something, especially if it's private property, the government should have nothing over. If they said, I don't know. It's that sort of thing I don't support. They should not. So that's where I'm libertarian. Like private property rights means private property rights. There's always that awkward thing that the government, I think it's the same. It might be the same in the US, I'm not sure. But in Australia, say if you live near an airport and you buy a house near this airport, but then the airport had plans and the government owns it and they had plans to expand the airport, they could say, we need you to move house because we're going to dig up your land. And they
I think the concept you're referring to is eminent domain. And yes, in the U.S. that has happened before. In fact, here in El Paso, recently, this has caused a bit of a stir. I think we're building a new like sports rink or arena, something like that, like downtown. Try to kick up our sluggish economy. But they kicked a bunch of people out of their houses and gave them they gave them apartments, but they gave them insufficient time to find new living, etc. And they claimed eminent domain. Like, oh, this is close enough within our area that we we legally we can kick you off your land.
Yeah, and I think when say if even the government originally owned that land, when they sanctioned it off and sold it off to someone else, it's no longer theirs. And it's a very relational thing that the government should be there to work for the people, for the community, but a lot of the times they don't. They do it for their own, monetary gains, and it's sort of that I don't support. They should definitely, even if they were to do that, give them the right amount of time to do so, or buy it off them, not kick them out, whatever, go through the normal process. But if people want to stay there, that's their right, but they don't have that right. It doesn't actually completely exist. There's what I was mentioning before. I don't like how much the government is involved with other countries. That sounds a bit weird, but let me explain myself. So Australia has a lot of money that goes towards Indonesia and China. Do I need to say any more? You know, the biggest communist country, and then the biggest Islamic country, and they're both quite wealthy. We don't need to be donating. Did you know that actually Australian government paid $7 million to Planned Parenthood this year?
Really?
And apparently they've been giving money to your government for that health thing since about 2007. That's
Wait,
when we had a
to us, like the
yeah,
US.
for the women's health thing, mainly Planned Parenthood, that sort of thing. I had no idea, but it wasn't until Trump pulled out of those funds that our government stepped forward and said we'll continue to support that. And I'm like, I didn't even know we were doing that at all. And I'm like, why our money goes to places where they're not needed and or are irrelevant to us? I'm thinking, it's kind of like we've got the opposite going in. Like, you know, yeah, we do have regulations that, you know, make it difficult for small business, and as a result, and all that. But we're outsourcing our money, we're outsourcing our jobs, and sometimes it's not the government's fault. Sometimes that's just big companies doing that. But
Yeah, it's sort of a doctrine that's poisoned. It's poisoned both the right and the left. I mean, with the right, you have what are referred to as neoconservatives. You know, sort of rose in like the 60s, 70s. They were heavily influenced by Keynesian economics, so they're very big on foreign intervention. I had a professor who, by the way, is actually like the advisor to the college Republicans here, Dr. Timothy Roth. He goes to Washington back and forth a lot, and he actually worked under the Reagan administration, so he knows his stuff.
yeah.
I took public sector economics class with him, and basically that class taught us about social welfare theory, which is what influenced the policy decisions of Bill Clinton, and to an extent you could argue even influenced Reagan, George H.W. Bush, you know, then Clinton, then even possibly GW himself. But basically, social welfare theory teaches that if the government has its hand in the economy, it can synthetically make businesses behave more like perfect competitors, you know, subsidize one, tax the other, etc., you know, play favorites for the general welfare of society. Yeah, it's, you know, gross generalization, but what the hell is social welfare? What the hell is social justice? What do any of these terms mean? And can you really quantify quote unquote perfect competition? And sad to say, this corporatist attitude has poisoned a lot of right wing parties in the West. You know, where they'll cooperate perfectly with left wing parties, you know, to sell out their native population's children's futures to employ Chinese, you know, Indians, people around the world. You know, give them opportunities at the sacrifice of not only our jobs, but also causing wage depression in our country, so that wages like don't rise and stay stagnant. I can tell that your country seems in a very similar situation.
Well, we're in an awkward situation. I think last year we were in debt. We had more imports than exports, so that's that international thing. But because we're such a small nation, we rely so much on everybody else around us. And because we lack in manufacturing now, there's very little manufacturing. We still have some food manufacturing, but we don't actually really create anything anymore. The companies like Aldi, who are from Germany, they're coming in and they're setting up their grocery stores everywhere, you know, and they're competing with our main grocery stores. But those grocery stores that already were here, they're already abandoning Australian farmers and everything like that, and they're buying stuff from the US, they're buying stuff from Asia. You know, most manufacturing is probably done in China. That's being sold in Australia.
So you have the same problem here in America. Everything's made in China.
And people, even so, for example, the car manufacturing business. We have a part of GM Motors called Holden's, kind of like Australian Chevrolet, and we still have headquarters here. But their last and they're the last car manufacturers in Australia. They're shutting down at the end of this year. And they will have no more after that because people buy overseas, cars from overseas. We have a lot more Chinese cars coming in now. It's just Asia's taking over. You kind of talked about that puppets on a string. It wouldn't surprise me if anything similar is happening here, where they go, oh, we'll support small business, and then all of a sudden they'll bring the others guys back. It's like this war happening. At the moment, the small business are deeply affected.
Well,
everywhere.
the worst part about this corporatism too is that it's funny. It seems as though the left and the right were both sort of half right about something. The left always blamed our economic problems. Oh, the 1%, those evil corporations. The right always blamed outsourcing and and overregulation, overtaxation. They blamed. It seemed like the left and the right always seemed to blame two different things when in reality both were kind of half right. And when you combine their picture together, the big multinational corporations, your Googles, your Apples, they can afford the regulation, the taxation, etc. And it's actually beneficial because if they have their way, it bumps all small businesses out of the market eventually, and before you know it, boom, this big global one world economy and one world order, it can be possible through corporatism, interestingly enough.
Yeah, it can. It's interesting you say that. When I was in high school, before I even understood a lot of politics stuff, when I was like grade 8 or 9, but we were looking into, I was studying business at school though, and so we were looking into the economy and everything like that. The way that I understood it was the right wings, they saved all the money, and then when the left wing got voted in, then they spent all the money, and then the other guys got back in and saved all the money, and then the other guys spent all the money. That's how my immature mind understood it. And to some extent, that kind of, and you're just talking about those half truths. It's sort of like how they were. They both had an idea of what needed to be done, but they just did it sort of in excessive amounts. I can't say that's the same for our mainstream Conservative Party now, because things are shifting. Things are starting to shift here in Australia. I think you still have a huge support for Republicans in America. Our support for our mainstream conservative groups, well, the Prime Minister, who's supposed to be leader of the Conservative Party, just said that the Liberals here are conservatives. He said that the Liberal Party was never a conservative party, so that's a recent media trend. And we're all going, whoa! So we have loads of small little minority conservative parties, and two came together recently to make one party. Some coalitions there's some gossip about there might be some coalitions happening. We're not so sure.
I'm guessing you have a parliamentary system, kind of like Europe does, where you have all these.
We have Westminster, so it's the same as England.
Okay. So you have all these low percentages, and you have like a bunch of different parties, and they form coalitions and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I always find that interesting. That America basically has two main parties that compete. And they sort of have these broad left and right groups, but then in Europe you'll have a bunch of different groups representing a bunch of different agendas, but they'll form coalitions to vaguely get each of their goals.
So England and Australia, possibly Canada, I'm not as sure about Canada, but England and Australia are kind of like in between. So we do have these two major left and right. So we have Labour and the Conservatives. I forget what they're called in England, but over here we have it's the Liberal Party, but they have a coalition with the National Party, and they are the other side. Except both mainstream groups have lost a lot of attention lately, and but we're starting to have all these other things, little groups split up on both sides. I think there's more minority groups on the right wing than there are on the left wing. Funny that, but yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I find international politics interesting. I mean, I'm not as studied up as I should be, because frankly, this is what you get for living in the American bubble, is that you're sort of oblivious to everyone else's problems.
You know a lot more than probably the average person.
It's just because I follow a lot of YouTubers.